A glass shattered against the floor. The room went dead silent. A man stood at the center of a banquet hall, wine dripping down his face, his jaw locked tight. 3 men surrounded him. One cracked his knuckles. Another rolled up his sleeves like he was getting ready for something ugly. The third just smiled and waited. They wanted a reaction. They wanted him to flinch, to bow, to shrink down and apologize. He didn't move. Not a single muscle. He just looked at them, one by one. Slow. Calm. The kind of calm that makes your stomach drop. What they didn't know was that the man standing in front of them was Jackie Chan. And Jackie Chan was not the man they thought he was. What happened in the next 3 minutes left every single person in that room frozen where they stood. Stay with me on this one. This was Tokyo, 1988. Jackie Chan had been invited to a private reception hosted by some of the most powerful men in the Japanese entertainment industry. Studio heads, network executives, a few retired military types with deep pockets and deeper connections. On paper, the evening was supposed to be a celebration. Jackie's Hong Kong films had been dominating the Japanese box office for the better part of a decade. His face was on billboards from Shibuya to Osaka. Audiences loved him. They packed theaters every time he released a new film. Japan was one of his biggest markets outside of Hong Kong, and the numbers kept climbing year after year. But behind the smiles and the champagne, something else was going on. The man who organized the dinner was named Takashi Morita. He ran one of the largest talent agencies in Japan. He controlled television contracts, endorsement deals, and had a direct line to every major studio in Tokyo. When Morita wanted a project greenlit, it got greenlit. When he wanted someone blacklisted, they disappeared from the industry overnight. He was used to being the most important person in any room he walked into. And he did not appreciate the fact that a comedian from Hong Kong was stealing the spotlight from his own stable of talent. See, that's how Morita saw Jackie. Not as a martial artist. Not as a filmmaker. Not as a trained athlete who had been studying kung fu since he was 6 years old at one of the most brutal opera schools in China. To Morita, Jackie was a clown. A guy who did funny kicks and fell off buildings for laughs. A performing monkey from the mainland who got lucky. And that night, Morita had a plan to prove it. He was going to show every power player at that table that Jackie Chan was nothing without his cameras, his stunt team, and his editing bay. Nothing at all. The dinner was held in a private room at one of Tokyo's most exclusive restaurants. Tatami floors, sliding paper doors, a long, low table set with dishes that cost more per plate than most people earned in a week. About 30 guests. All men. All Japanese. And then Jackie. He arrived with a translator and a small entourage. Just 2 people. His manager and an assistant. He bowed at the door. He shook hands. He smiled at everyone he met. He complimented the food before he had even tasted it. He told a joke about the flight from Hong Kong that had half the table laughing before the first course arrived. Now here's the thing. Jackie was good at this. He was genuinely charming. Not fake charming. Not working the room charming. Real. He could walk into a room full of strangers and have them eating out of his hand in 5 minutes flat. He asked questions. He remembered names. He made people feel like the most interesting person in the conversation. That was part of his talent. It was one of the reasons audiences connected with him on screen. He felt real. He felt like someone you could sit down with and talk to. But it was also the thing that fooled people. Because when you see a man laughing and cracking jokes and playing the clown, you forget what is underneath. You forget that the man telling the joke once trained 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, at the China Drama Academy under a master named Yu Jimuan. You forget that his parents signed him over to that school when he was 6 years old because they could not afford to raise him. You forget that his teachers beat students who did not perform with wooden canes across their backs and legs until the skin split open. You forget that children at that school slept on hard floors, ate whatever scraps they were given, and were punished for crying. You forget that Jackie spent 10 years in that place. 10 years of being hit, stretched, thrown, kicked, and broken down until fighting was as natural to him as breathing. You forget that by the time Jackie was 12 years old, he could take a full-speed kick to the ribs and get back up without blinking. He could do a standing backflip on concrete. He could fight with swords, staffs, his fists, his elbows, his knees. He could fight with anything. Morita did not know any of this. Or if he did, he dismissed it as exaggeration. Movie hype. Press releases designed to sell tickets. To him, it was all nonsense. And tonight, he was going to expose the truth in front of every important man in the room. The evening moved through its courses. Sake flowed freely. Conversation drifted from business to gossip to sports and back again. Morita was a gracious host on the surface. He kept Jackie's glass full. He introduced him to every guest by name. He even told a few stories about Jackie's films, praising the stunts, the comedy, the box office numbers. It was all very warm, very polished, and completely calculated. Then, around the third bottle of sake, Morita stood up. The room quieted. He raised his glass and made a toast to their guest of honor. Very polite, very smooth. He talked about the bond between Japanese and Hong Kong cinema. He talked about respect. He talked about tradition. Then he said something that changed the tone of the entire evening. He said he had arranged a small demonstration. A gift, he called it. He wanted to show Jackie something special. Some real martial arts. Not movie fighting. Not wire tricks. Not choreography. The real thing. He clapped his hands twice, and the sliding doors at the far end of the room opened. In walked a man built like a weapon. Tall, wide shoulders, a neck like a post, crew cut, military posture. He wore a white karate gi with a black belt so worn the fabric had gone gray at the edges. This was not a weekend hobbyist. This was not someone who trained twice a week at a community gym. This was a competition fighter at the absolute peak of his physical ability. Morita introduced him as Hayashi. He said Hayashi was a 3-time national karate champion. He said Hayashi had never lost a sanctioned fight in 11 years of professional competition. He said Hayashi had trained members of the Japanese military police in close-quarters hand-to-hand combat. Then Morita turned to Jackie with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Perhaps," he said, "you would like to show us some of your movie techniques?" The room laughed. Not all of them, but enough. Jackie smiled back. He shook his head gently and said he was just an actor, just an entertainer. He said he would not want to embarrass himself in front of a real champion. He was deflecting. He was being diplomatic. He was giving Morita a graceful exit, a chance to drop the whole thing and move on without losing face in front of his guests. Morita did not take it. He pressed harder. He said it would be fun. A friendly exchange. Nothing serious. No contact, even. Just forms. Just a small show for the guests. Something to remember the evening by. The crowd joined in. Some clapped. "Come on, Jackie. Show us something. Just a little. For fun." Jackie kept his smile, but something in his eyes changed. Something behind them went flat and quiet. Still, he said no. He poured himself some green tea. He picked up his chopsticks. He started eating. That is when Hayashi moved. Without warning, the karate champion stepped forward and threw a hard, fast back fist aimed at the side of Jackie's head. Not a demonstration. Not a pulled punch. Not a slow-motion technique performed for the audience. A real strike. Full speed. The kind of strike that was designed to connect with bone. The kind that could fracture a cheekbone or crack an orbital socket. Jackie did not even put down his chopsticks. His left hand came up from the table, caught Hayashi's wrist mid-flight, redirected the force downward and to the outside, and in one smooth motion, folded the man's arm behind his back and pressed him face-first into the tatami mat. Took less than 2 seconds. The entire exchange was over before most people in the room had time to process what they were seeing. Hayashi hit the floor so hard the dishes on the table rattled and 2 sake glasses tipped over. Nobody in the room said a word. Jackie held him there for a moment, controlled, firm, not angry, just present. Then he let go. He stepped back. He picked up his tea and took a calm sip. He looked at Morita and said, in Japanese, "Good technique. Very fast. Now believe me." The room was frozen solid. 30 grown men sitting in absolute silence, staring at what had just happened. Their mouths open. Their drinks halfway to their lips. Hayashi got to his feet slowly, rubbing his shoulder, his face dark red. Not from pain, from shame. A man who had never lost a fight in over a decade of professional competition had just been put on the floor by a comedian who was holding a pair of chopsticks in his other hand. Jackie sat back down. He picked up his food. He said something light and funny to the man sitting next to him. He laughed. He poured the man more sake. The table, slowly, nervously, started to relax. Glasses were refilled. Someone cracked a joke. The conversation picked back up. Quieter now, more careful, but it picked up. The tension drained out of the room bit by bit. It seemed like the moment had passed. A strange incident. An awkward misfire. Everyone could move on now. It was over. It was not over. Morita had been standing at the head of the table the entire time. He had not moved. He had not spoken. He had not touched his drink. His face had gone from tan to white. See, this was no longer about a demonstration. This had become personal. Jackie had made him look foolish in front of every powerful man in the room. Every single person at that table would remember this night for years. They would tell the story at other dinners, other meetings, other negotiations. They would remember that Morita's handpicked champion had been put down in 2 seconds flat by the man Morita had publicly dismissed as a clown. And in Morita's world, reputation was not just important. It was everything. Reputation was currency. Reputation was survival. So he made a decision. The worst decision of his life. He picked up his glass of red wine, walked slowly, deliberately to where Jackie was sitting. He stood over him for a long moment. Jackie looked up from his food. Their eyes met, and without a single word, Morita turned the glass upside down and poured it over Jackie's head. Red wine. Down his hair. Down his face. Into his white collar. Onto the tatami beneath him. The glass slipped from Morita's fingers and shattered against the floor. That was the sound from the very beginning of this story. That crash you heard in the first sentence. That was this moment. That was the moment everything broke. 3 of Morita's men stood up immediately. They were not guests. They were hired muscle. Security. Enforcers. Big men with thick arms and flat expressions. The kind of men whose entire job was to make problems disappear. One blocked the nearest door. The other 2 closed in from Jackie's left and right side, cutting off any possible path to an exit. This is where the story turns. Pay close attention, because up until this point you could still call this whole thing a misunderstanding. A cultural clash. An ego bruised at a dinner party. Something unfortunate but survivable. But the moment Morita poured that wine and his men sealed the exits, the nature of the conflict changed completely. This was no longer about pride. This was no longer about martial arts or demonstrations or saving face. This was about power. Raw, ugly power. Morita was telling Jackie that in this room, in this country, among these men, Jackie was nothing. And he was going to make absolutely sure Jackie walked out of that building knowing it. Or maybe did not walk out at all. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. Because what happened next is something nobody in that room ever forgot. Jackie stood up slowly. Wine ran down his face and dripped off his chin onto his shirt. He did not wipe it off. He did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He looked at the 3 men closing in around him. Then he looked at Morita, and he said one sentence in flawless Japanese. Clear, calm, perfect pronunciation. His translator later told journalists that Jackie had been studying Japanese in private for years. Nobody at the table knew. Nobody had any idea he could speak the language. The sentence was simple. For words. He said, "You should sit down." Morita did not sit down. He nodded once to the man on Jackie's left. The first man lunged forward and grabbed Jackie by the collar of his shirt with both hands, trying to yank him off balance and drag him to the ground. Jackie did not resist the grab. He did not try to pull away. Instead, he stepped into the man's momentum, dropped his center of gravity low, seized the man's right wrist with one hand and his elbow with the other, pivoted his hips sharply, and threw him over his hip in a clean, textbook judo throw. The man left his feet completely. His body sailed through the air and hit the tatami floor so hard the sliding doors on both sides of the room rattled in their frames. He did not get back up. The second man came from the right. Bigger. Heavier. He swung a wide, looping punch aimed at Jackie's jaw. The kind of wild, uncontrolled punch that a man throws when he is used to winning fights by size alone and has never faced someone who actually knows how to fight. Jackie slipped inside the arc of the swing, let it sail past his ear, caught the man's extended arm at the elbow joint, and drove him backward 3 hard steps into the wall behind him. One short, sharp knee strike to the man's midsection folded him in half like a piece of paper. He dropped to his knees, gasping, both arms wrapped tight around his stomach. The third man did not charge. He was smarter than the other two. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a knife. Small. A folding blade, maybe 4 inches long. He flicked it open with a smooth, practiced motion. He held it low, down by his thigh with the blade pointing upward. Now that is important, because the way a person holds a knife tells you everything you need to know. An amateur holds a knife high, up near his chest, like he has seen it done in movies. Someone who has actually been trained to use a blade holds it low, tight to the body, where it is harder to see and much harder to grab. This man had training. The room went absolutely still. Not a sound. Not a breath. Jackie did not back up. He did not look at the knife. He shifted his weight forward onto the balls of his feet. His hands came up, open, loose, palms facing outward. His eyes locked onto the center of the man's chest. Not the blade. Not the hand. The body. Anyone who has ever trained seriously in close-quarters combat knows this rule. You do not track the weapon. You track the person holding it, because the weapon goes wherever the body goes. The man lunged. Fast. The blade came up toward Jackie's midsection in a short, tight arc. Jackie sidestepped to the outside, caught the knife hand at the wrist with his left hand, twisted hard to rotate the blade safely away from his body, and with his right hand, delivered a sharp downward strike to the man's forearm just above the wrist. The fingers opened. The knife dropped to the floor. In the exact same motion, Jackie redirected the man's forward momentum and sent him stumbling face first into the edge of the heavy wooden table. Dishes crashed. Sake bottles tumbled and shattered. Food scattered across the tatami. The knife skidded across the floor and came to rest directly at Morita's feet. 3 men down. Maybe 12 seconds from start to finish. Jackie had not thrown a single closed fist punch. And then he did something that made every single person in that room understand exactly who they had been sitting next to all evening long. He paused. He looked at the mess on the table, the broken glass, the spilled food, the overturned bottles. And he bent down, picked up one of the fallen sake bottles that had not broken, and placed it carefully upright on the table. He straightened a plate. He picked up a pair of chopsticks that had fallen to the floor and laid them parallel on the table the proper way, the way they are supposed to rest. He tidied the space around him like a man cleaning up after an ordinary dinner that had simply gotten a bit messy. Then he turned to face the room. All 30 men. Many of them were on their feet now, backed against the walls. A few were still frozen in their seats with their hands flat on the table, as if they were afraid that any movement might make them the next target. Jackie bowed. Deep, slow, formal. The kind of bow you give to someone you truly and deeply respect. There was nothing mocking about it. Nothing sarcastic. Nothing performed for dramatic effect. It was given with absolute and unmistakable sincerity. He was thanking them for the meal. Nobody moved. Nobody made a sound. Morita was still standing at the head of the table. The knife lay at his feet. His 3 hired men were scattered around the room in various states of pain and confusion. One was flat on his back on the tatami, staring up at the ceiling, not moving. One was on his knees against the wall, arms wrapped around his midsection, wheezing for air. The third was slumped against the edge of the table, staring down at his own empty hand, opening and closing his fingers like he still could not understand where the knife had gone. Morita's face had gone from white to gray. His hands were trembling at his sides. He looked like a man watching his own funeral. Because in a very real sense, that is exactly what was happening. Every person in that room was a witness. Every single one of them would tell this story, and every version of the story would contain the same essential truth. Takashi Morita had tried to publicly humiliate a guest in his own country. He had arranged the whole evening specifically to embarrass a man who had done nothing wrong. And that man had taken apart Morita's entire operation in 12 seconds without raising his voice, without losing his composure, and without throwing a single punch. Jackie straightened his wine-stained shirt. He turned toward the door. He walked past Morita without looking at him. His footsteps on the tatami were the only sound in the room. Then, just as he reached the door, he stopped. He turned back, and he leaned in close to Morita, close enough that only Morita could hear what he said. What Jackie whispered in that moment was never confirmed publicly. Morita never repeated it. Jackie never mentioned it. But a guest who had been sitting just 2 seats from where Morita stood later told a journalist in Hong Kong what he believed he heard. He said Jackie's words were something very close to this. Next time you invite someone to dinner, make sure you know who is sitting at your table. Then Jackie-chan walked out of the room. His translator and his manager followed close behind. The sliding door shut behind them, and for a very long time after that, nobody in that room moved at all. The aftermath was devastating for Takashi Morita. Within a single week, the story had spread through every entertainment office in Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto. The details shifted and grew depending on who was telling it. In some versions, Jackie fought 5 men instead of 3. In others, he used a pair of chopsticks as an actual weapon. One popular retelling had him catching the knife out of midair. But the core of the story remained exactly the same in every version. Morita had tried to break Jackie-chan, and Jackie-chan had broken him instead. Morita's talent agency lost 3 of its biggest clients within a month. 2 major television deals collapsed entirely. A production company that had been negotiating a 5-year partnership with Morita's agency pulled out of talks without explanation. A powerful studio head who had been present at the dinner personally called Morita's office the following Monday and told his assistant, calmly and clearly, that their professional relationship was finished. Word spread fast in that world. By the end of the 2nd month, Morita could not get a meeting with anyone who mattered. Doors that had been open to him for 20 years closed one after another. Not because of what Morita did to Jackie specifically, because of what the entire incident revealed about Morita's character and his judgment. A man who picks a fight he cannot possibly win, with a person he clearly does not understand, in front of the exact audience whose respect he needs to survive in the industry. A man who resorts to public humiliation when his ego gets bruised. A man who keeps hired thugs at a dinner party. That is not a man you trust with your money. That is not a man you trust with your reputation. That is not a man you want sitting across from you at a negotiation table. That is not a man you do business with. Period. Jackie, on the other hand, saw his career in Japan grow even faster than before. Not because of the fight itself, because of how he handled everything that came after. He never talked about that night in public. Not once. Not ever. He never used it as a story to promote himself. He never named Morita or anyone else who had been at the dinner. When Japanese journalists heard the rumors circulating and asked him about the incident years later, he just smiled that wide smile of his and said he had had a wonderful time in Tokyo and the food was absolutely excellent. That restraint, that quiet discipline, that was the thing that did the most damage to Morita and the most good for Jackie. Because the easiest thing in the world would have been to tell everyone. To sit down on a talk show and say, "This powerful Japanese executive tried to publicly humiliate me at a dinner, and I put his entire security team on the floor in 12 seconds. That story would have been satisfying to tell. It would have gone everywhere. But it also would have been petty. And Jackie understood something that Morita never grasped, not even after he lost everything. Real power does not need an audience. Real skill does not need applause. The moment you start bragging about what you are capable of, you become the kind of person who needs other people's validation to feel strong. And that is not strength. That is the opposite of strength. Jackie never needed that validation from anyone. He had trained since he was a small child. He had broken bones on film sets and kept right on filming. He had cracked his skull doing a stunt, dislocated his shoulder, torn ligaments in both knees, and showed up the very next morning ready to work. He did not fight in that room to prove anything to Morita or to anyone else at that table. He fought because 3 men closed in on him and one of them had a blade, and there was no other option available. He did what he needed to do, nothing more, and then he stopped. That is a kind of control most people never develop. Most people, when the adrenaline hits, when the anger kicks in, they keep going. They escalate. They want payback. Jackie did not want payback. He wanted the situation to end. And the very second the threat was gone, he went right back to being exactly who he always was. Polite, warm, funny, gracious, completely and entirely himself. That is what made the whole thing so devastating for everyone on Morita's side. It was not the fighting. It was the fact that Jackie did not change. He was the same man before the wine hit his face and after the last body hit the floor. The same smile, the same posture, the same warmth in his voice. Morita had tried to strip Jackie Chan of his dignity, and instead, Jackie had shown every man in that room what genuine dignity actually looks like. It looks like a man who could end you and simply chooses not to make a spectacle of it. There is one more story that circulated years later among martial artists in Hong Kong and Tokyo. It said that the karate champion, Hayashi, tracked Jackie down about 6 months after the dinner. He did not come for revenge. He did not come for a rematch. He showed up at Jackie's studio in Kowloon, bowed deeply at the door, and quietly asked if he could train there. He told Jackie that being put face down on the tatami that night was the single most important moment of his entire martial arts career. Not because it was humiliating, because it taught him the difference between winning sanctioned fights in a controlled ring and truly understanding what combat means. Jackie did not turn him away. He welcomed Hayashi into the studio without a word about what had happened in Tokyo. He trained with Hayashi for 3 full days. They sparred early in the mornings. They discussed technique over lunch. They compared the differences between kung fu and karate, between Chinese and Japanese approaches to hand-to-hand combat, and they found more common ground than either of them expected. They shared meals together. They laughed, and they kept in contact for years afterward. Hayashi would later tell students of his own that the 3 days he spent with Jackie Chan taught him more about martial arts than the previous 15 years of competition. Now stop and think about that for a moment. Think about the kind of person who responds to public humiliation not with anger, not with resentment, but with grace. Who responds to physical violence not with fury, but with calm, measured precision. Who responds to a man whose only purpose that evening was to destroy his reputation by simply and completely refusing to be destroyed. Not through revenge. Not through grudges. Not through public declarations or press conferences. Through something quieter. Something deeper. Something much harder to fake than toughness. That is who Jackie Chan was underneath all of it. Not the guy doing backflips off a clock tower for a movie camera. Not the guy sliding down the side of a building on a fire hose. Not the guy taking a folding chair to the face and making the audience laugh about it. Underneath every stunt and every joke was this man. The man who stood perfectly still in a room full of people who wanted nothing more than to break him. And then he walked out. No scratches. No grudges. No raised voice. Not even a complaint. The wine stain on his shirt dried and the shirt was thrown away. The broken dishes were swept up and replaced. The tatami mats were cleaned and eventually switched out for new ones. The restaurant went back to serving its wealthy clients as if nothing had ever happened within its walls. But what took place in that private room stayed with every person who witnessed it for the rest of their natural lives. Because they all learned the same lesson that night. And it is a lesson worth remembering. The most dangerous person in the room is never the one making the most noise. It is always the one making the least. And when that person finally decides to move, you had better hope that you are not the one standing in their way. That was Jackie Chan. That was always Jackie Chan.